When I first saw the listing for the old Coulter place, it didn't even have a real photo, just a faded aerial map and a line that said 180 acres, rural reclamation eligible. Most people scrolled right past it. Me? I saw potential. After 20 years of testifying in courtrooms as a forensic land survey expert, I'd had my fill of concrete, lawyers, and fluorescent lights. I wanted dirt. Real, honest dirt. The kind that stains your hands, not your conscience. The property sat just outside the Coyote Glen community, a picture-perfect enclave with identical beige houses and rules about mailbox color. My land was the opposite, a forgotten piece of earth with wild sage, half a barn leaning like a drunk, and a pond more mud than water. To me, it looked like freedom. When the auctioneer's gavel hit the block, the farm was mine. I signed the documents through the State Agricultural Reclamation Program, got a modest environmental grant for restoration, and walked out of the county building with a folder full of proof that my land was not part of any homeowners association. That detail gave me more joy than the purchase itself. The first week was blissfully quiet. I parked my old Airstream trailer near what used to be the barn, patched the holes in the roof with aluminum sheets, and hooked up a solar generator. My only neighbors were the coyotes and the wind cutting through the grass. Every morning I made black coffee on a camping stove and reminded myself that this peace was the point. During the days, I cleared the overgrown access road and fixed the wooden bridge over the small creek. I posted a few photos online in a community group called Our County Stewards. Folks seemed to like them. Comments like, "Glad someone's finally restoring that old farm," or "Looks like it's in good hands." It felt nice, being the good guy for once. About a week later, Sheriff Denny Hope stopped by while I was unloading lumber. He was one of those men built like a refrigerator, with a handshake that could crack walnuts. "Heard you're the one cleaning up the old Miller tract," he said. "Been an eyesore for years." I told him about the grant, the ecological plans, the paperwork that proved my independence from the neighboring HOA. He gave me a slow nod and said, "Good. Folks over at Coyote Glen like to think the county stops where their street signs do. Don't let 'em bully you." I didn't think much of that warning at the time. Then, 2 days later, I met her. It happened as I was trimming brush near the eastern fence line. A shiny white SUV rolled to a stop on the road, and out stepped a woman who looked like she'd been carved out of ice and pearls. Perfect blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me," she called out in a tone that made "excuse me" sound like a threat. "Are you the owner here?" I wiped the sweat from my neck. "That's right. Can I help you?" "I'm Karen Westmore, president of the Coyote Glen Homeowners Association." She said it like she expected me to salute. "We've noticed increased activity on this property. Heavy equipment, noise, and, well, some landscaping that doesn't conform to community standards." I stared at her. "Ma'am, this land isn't part of your community." She gave a tight smile. "Oh, I'm sure that's what your realtor told you, but the borders have been redrawn. You'll be receiving information soon." And with that, she turned on her heel, got into her SUV, and left me in a cloud of dust. That night, I sat by the campfire, staring at the flames and the stack of legal papers beside me. Everything in writing said I was free of them, free of meetings, bylaws, and Karens with clipboards. But the way she said "you'll be receiving information soon" gnawed at me. I'd dealt with bureaucrats before. I knew a prelude to trouble when I heard one. Still, I wasn't about to let a suburban committee tell me what I could do with my dirt. I poured myself a drink, leaned back in my chair, and looked out over my land. The moonlight hit the broken barn roof, and for a moment it looked like silver armor. Maybe that was fitting. I had a feeling I'd need it. A week later, I woke up to the sound of rain hammering against the trailer roof and something flapping outside. When I stepped out, still half asleep, I saw a sheet of paper pinned to my front gate with blue painter's tape, soaked and curling at the edges. The words were blurred by water, but I could still make them out. Notice of violations, unauthorized activity, excessive noise, and non-compliant land use. There was no signature, no seal, no letterhead, just bureaucratic nonsense typed in. 12-point font. A second page was stuck underneath, accusing me of failure to submit landscaping plans for approval. I actually laughed out loud. Landscaping plans. For a farm that had weeds taller than my truck. I crumpled the paper, tossed it into a puddle, and figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The next morning, as I was loading gravel into the old pickup, a white SUV and a silver hybrid pulled up to the gate. Two people stepped out wearing neon vests that said, Coyote Glen Community Affairs. I swear, they looked like they'd dressed for a safari through suburbia. One was a younger guy with a clipboard, sharp haircut, eyes like a tax auditor. The other was a woman who smiled the way snakes do before they strike. "Good morning," she chirped. "We're with the HOA Oversight Committee. We just need a moment of your time." I leaned against the truck, crossing my arms. "Sure. What's this about?" The man opened his folder with theatrical precision. As of January 1st, under the revised Charter of Coyote Glen, Section 7, Clause 3A, this property now falls within our jurisdictional boundary. Upon change of ownership, parcels within 1 mile of the East Gate are automatically incorporated into the association's maintenance district. I blinked at him. "You're telling me my land got annexed into your HOA because it's near your sign?" "That's correct," he said, smiling like he'd just explained gravity. "We'll need your initial membership fee, $6,300, and a signed acknowledgement of compliance by the end of the month." I let that hang in the air for a moment, then said, "You might want to tell your legal department to double-check the county maps before they start trespassing." The woman's smile twitched. "This isn't trespassing, Mr. Coulter. It's an official notice." "On my land," I said, pointing to the muddy ground under her shiny flats. "And you can take your notice back to whoever wrote it, because this property doesn't belong to your plastic kingdom." They exchanged looks, clearly not used to resistance. The man finally said, "Refusal to comply may result in penalties." "Go ahead," I told him. "I'll make sure the sheriff gets a copy. He loves paperwork." They left after that, tires spitting mud. I watched them drive off, shaking my head. HOA jurisdiction. My ass. That afternoon, I called the county assessor's office just to make sure I hadn't lost my mind. The clerk confirmed exactly what I already knew. My property lay entirely outside the Coyote Glen boundaries. Not a foot of overlap. I had the plat map, deed, and survey markers to prove it. The woman even laughed when I read her the HOA's so-called clause. "They can't extend authority without owner consent," she said. "That's not how zoning works." I thanked her, hung up, and printed copies of every document I could find. Maps, coordinates, legal descriptions. I sealed them in a plastic folder labeled, "In case of HOA nonsense." That evening, I sat by the pond with a beer, watching the reflection of my solar lights ripple in the water. The air smelled of wet cedar and burnt fuel from the generator. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the hum of a drone, soft but distinct. I looked up and saw a small light hovering, then veering back toward the neat row of houses beyond the ridge. So, that's how they wanted to play. Quiet surveillance, veiled threats, fake paperwork. I'd dealt with worse. I'd spent half my career exposing forged property records and falsified maps for court cases. I knew every trick in the book. I smiled into the dark, feeling that old professional edge creeping back. Maybe retirement was over. Maybe it was time to remind these people that not all neighbors roll over when the HOA knocks. 2 days after the HOA clowns tried to annex my land with a clipboard and a smirk, I woke up to something new. A sign, freshly planted at the edge of my eastern boundary, facing the county road. It read in bold serif font, "Welcome to Coyote Glen Community Grounds." Underneath, smaller print added, "All visitors subject to HOA rules and review." It was bolted into a steel pole, not hammered in, bolted. They'd drilled into bedrock. I stood there with my coffee steaming in the cold morning air, staring at it like it had personally insulted my ancestors. My first thought was to rip it out. My second thought was, let it stay. For now. Let it sit there and scream entitlement at every truck that passed, because now I was done playing nice. That same day, I checked my trail cams. I'd installed them more out of habit than necessity, hidden up in trees and fence posts, infrared, motion sensing, and damn reliable. When I pulled the footage, my stomach dropped a little. Not out of fear, but anger. There, just past midnight, was a silver pickup truck, license plate clean as day, pulling up to my gate. 2 figures got out. One of them cut the wire to my generator, the other unbolted my gate and tossed it into the brush like it was garbage. One of them had a very familiar build. Broad shoulders, nervous posture, constantly looking over his shoulder like he thought the trees might rat him out. I recognized him from HOA's welcome packet online. Tyler Westmore, HOA's monitoring director. Also known as Karen's son. They left less than 10 minutes later. The generator was dead. Cameras on the south side were cut, but they hadn't seen the backups. I didn't hesitate. I drove straight into town and handed the footage to Sheriff Hope. When I showed him the timestamp and the license plate, he let out a low whistle. "That's a felony," he muttered. "That's multiple felonies." "You gonna arrest them?" I asked. He scratched his beard, the way people do when they know they're not going to like their own answer. "We'll investigate. I'll log it and call their attorney." "Sheriff," I said carefully, "if this was reversed, if I cut their power and tore their gate down, you'd have me in cuffs by now." He didn't argue, just gave me a long, tired look. "I'll push it up the chain. You should consider getting legal counsel." Oh, I was way ahead of him. That night, I called an old friend from my expert witness days, Marissa Chen, a property rights attorney who'd made a name for herself suing cities into submission on eminent domain violations. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she said, "Jake, you've got yourself a baby-sized land grab attempt with adult-sized consequences. They're trying to railroad you into compliance using fabricated proximity clauses. I want in." We filed the paperwork the next morning, an official cease and desist to Coyote Glen HOA for attempted encroachment, vandalism, and harassment. Alongside that, Marissa filed a request for discovery into HOA financial practices, specifically how they absorbed new properties, and whether there were any irregularities in dues collection or boundary changes. That was the real play. I didn't just want them off my back. I wanted to know how deep this went. 2 days later, I was loading lumber for a new fence when a crew of landscapers pulled up in 2 trucks, marked with Coyote Glen's logo. They started unloading shovels and PVC pipe like they owned the place. I stepped onto the dirt road, blocking their path. "Who hired you?" One guy, maybe 19 years old and very overpaid, looked up from a roll of blueprints. HOA sent us. We're supposed to install drainage lines and signage for the community park." I laughed, not a chuckle, an unhinged, sharp laugh that made the poor kid take a step back. "This is my land. Your job ends where the HOA ends." "Which is," I pointed, "back behind that hill where your beige houses live." The foreman walked over, tried to argue easements and easterly rights of way. I pulled out a folder and handed him my deed and plat map. "This is legally surveyed private property. You break ground here, I call the sheriff and sue you into oblivion." They backed off, for now, but something told me this wasn't over. The more I resisted, the more desperate they'd get. I'd seen this kind of escalation before, in corporations, in courtrooms, in quiet land disputes that suddenly erupted into legal hell. And now I had the smell of one coming. It smelled like wet concrete, fake bylaws, and desperate power clinging to its final threads. By the end of that week, I knew it was time to stop just reacting and start fighting smart. Let them play suburban warlords with their fake laws and signs. I was going to beat them at their own game. And that started with setting a trap. I came up with the idea one evening while patching the barn roof, listening to the local AM radio station argue about zoning laws and property disputes. A caller mentioned an old protected well site that had caused a subdivision to halt development 10 years back. The next morning, I started digging through historical property records, and after a few hours, I found what I needed. A defunct but still listed groundwater well on the southern edge of my land, long capped and useless, but still visible in some archival maps, so I made it look real. I fenced the spot, posted an official-looking sign, "Protected Aquifer Monitoring Zone. Unauthorized access prohibited under Colorado Water Code, Title 37. Then I made sure my trail cams were fully operational and strategically placed. Infrared, silent, and backed up to a cloud I paid extra for. Just to nudge things along, I sent an anonymous letter to the HOA's board. Typed, no fingerprints, mailed from the next county over. It read, "The property at parcel 228C is attempting to obstruct HOA infrastructure development. Refuses shared use of environmental resources. Potential liability. Investigate immediately." I signed it, "A concerned resident." Sealed. Sent. 3 days later, I left the property for a supply run. Drove into town, picked up livestock fencing, more trail cam batteries, and coffee. Priorities, in that order. When I came back around dusk, my headlights swept across the south edge of my property and froze. A trench, not small, 6 feet wide, easily 2 deep, cutting right through the area I'd marked as a monitoring zone. There were flags, stakes, and even orange spray paint tagging the ground like a dam construction site. One corner of the trench came dangerously close to a line of trees I'd been trying to preserve for a reforestation grant. They didn't just violate my boundary, they nearly cost me federal money. No crew in sight, just the mess they'd left behind, and a small laminated sign that read, Phase 1, Community Drainage Integration. HOA logo at the top, complete with QR code linking to some nonsense PDF about water management responsibility. Zones. I scanned it. The map they used included my land. Falsified border. Labeled as unclaimed buffer acreage. I didn't get angry. Not right away. I got surgical. First, I called the state surveyor's office and requested a same-week site review. Second, I called Marissa. She was halfway through yelling into a Bluetooth headset when she said, "They stepped on the wrong land this time. Get me pictures, get me depth, get me timestamps. We're about to give them a civics lesson in ownership." Third, I uploaded everything to a drive. Drone footage from earlier that week, my false aquifer sign, the trench photos, the altered HOA PDF, and side-by-sides of the real and fake boundary. Maps. The state geodetic surveyor showed up 2 days later, a no-nonsense woman named Ingrid, who carried her measuring gear like she was going into battle. After 4 hours of GPS plotting and laser triangulation, she gave me a tired nod and said, "Your original boundary is correct. Their trench is 17 feet inside your property. They'll have to fill it back in, and I'd get that PDF authenticated. That's a forged public record." We filed a complaint for criminal misrepresentation of land boundaries, and Marissa sent an official letter to the county registrar demanding an audit. That's when things started unraveling. Turns out, someone in the county clerk's office had pushed through a boundary correction request from Coyote Glen 3 months earlier, quietly, without notifying adjacent landowners. That alone was already suspicious. But what made it worse? The request was approved without supporting documentation. And the clerk who signed it just so happened to be Karen's cousin, working under her maiden name. That little fact hit the case like kerosene on a barbecue. Marissa lit the match. She filed a formal notice of fraud against the HOA, the clerk, and unknown co-conspirators, along with a motion to freeze all HOA project spending until the investigation was complete. Then she notified the local paper. By the end of the week, my land was still full of weeds and broken fences. But now, it was also at the center of a quiet legal storm. And thanks to my little false aquifer stunt, I had the receipts. The only question now was, how deep did this go? By now, the gloves were off. The trench debacle had exposed just how far the HOA was willing to go to seize control. Not just over land, but over narrative, perception, reality itself. They played the long game. Fake paperwork, quiet manipulations, softly whispered lies dressed as policy. But I'd played that game in courtrooms and depositions for most of my career. I knew how to build a case, and now it was time to build something else, a shield. After Ingrid's geodetic survey confirmed my original boundaries, I made one more call to Dr. Lucas Abrams, an old university colleague who now headed an agroecology research lab out in Fort Collins. We hadn't spoken in years, but Lucas picked up like we'd shared a beer yesterday. I told him what was happening, the harassment, the forgery, the trench. And then I said, I want to put this land under something bigger, something they can't touch. Lucas didn't hesitate. You still got that southern runoff line and the wetland pocket you mentioned in that article back in the day? Yeah. Perfect, he said. We've got a grant for native pollinator corridors and land-based water remediation. It's federally backed. If we set up a pilot on your property, it becomes a research site. That means protected status. No HOA, no local zoning board, no trench-digging soccer moms with delusions of jurisdiction. Within 5 days, a university vehicle rolled down my dirt road with 2 grad students, 3 sensor kits, and a crate of bee-boxes. They helped me install monitoring poles near the creek bed, seeded an acre of native flowering plants, and marked out a test section for a bioswale filtration system that would catch agricultural runoff before it reached the water table. We submitted the plan to the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, along with photos, soil samples, and site history. Within 48 hours, I had the letter in my inbox. Temporary federal designation, environmental reclamation and research site. Enclosed was a big, beautiful clause. Any unauthorized construction, excavation, or modification is subject to fines under Title 33. That was federal law. I printed 4 copies of the notice and mounted them in weatherproof boxes around the perimeter. I wanted Karen and her clipboard crusaders to see them from their SUVs. At the same time, Marissa escalated our legal response. She drafted a request for judicial injunctive relief, demanding an immediate halt to all HOA external projects pending a fraud investigation. We submitted the altered PDFs, geodetic data, drone footage, and a growing list of testimonies from other landowners. folks who, like me, had been quietly pressured, manipulated, or misled into believing their properties had merged with the HOA through obscure clauses no one had ever voted on. The community group I'd posted to before, our county stewards, started taking notice. People began messaging me privately. One man said he'd been billed $500 in HOA-adjacent utility fees, even though he lived 2 blocks outside Coyote Glen. Another woman said she'd been denied a permit for a chicken coop because she was within aesthetic oversight range, whatever the hell that meant. The real breakthrough came when a woman named Lorraine Harper, a retired accountant and former HOA treasurer, reached out. She'd seen my post about the trench and recognized the QR code on the fake PDF. She told me, point blank, "That's not an HOA document. I handled their budget for 8 years. We never even funded a drainage project." Lorraine agreed to testify. She gave us copies of internal meeting notes and budget records that showed Karen had been operating a shadow fund, collecting off-book dues from peripheral properties and funneling money into unapproved projects. The sign, the trench, even the fake surveys, all paid from that fund. By the end of the week, Marissa filed a civil complaint with criminal referrals attached. Allegations included fraudulent boundary manipulation, misappropriation of association funds, unauthorized construction on private land, and attempted coercion under false legal pretenses. Meanwhile, I spent my afternoons tending to the bee boxes, planting ground cover, and watching as native butterflies came back to life over the creek bed. The irony was rich. The HOA had tried to bury my land in asphalt and pipe. I turned it into a federally protected pollinator sanctuary. And the best part? Every camera they tried to sneak onto my land now caught butterflies instead of violations. It was poetic, but I knew it wasn't over. The deeper we dug, the more it stank. And I had a feeling Karen wasn't going down without trying to take the whole damn hill with her. The courthouse smelled like old books and cheap linoleum polish, just like I remembered. I hadn't worn a tie in 3 years, but that morning I knotted one with deliberate precision. The hearing wasn't supposed to be dramatic, just procedural. But I knew better. Karen was showing up, and she wouldn't do it quietly. It was a pre-trial motion hearing on our injunction request, essentially asking the judge to freeze all HOA projects and spending while the fraud investigation played out. Marissa had briefed me the night before with her usual calm, surgical clarity. "Let them talk themselves into a corner," she said. "You just sit there and look credible." So I did. Karen strutted into the courtroom like she owned the building. Beige pantsuit, pearls, lips pressed into a determined line. She was flanked by 2 HOA board members and a lawyer from some mid-tier Denver firm with too much gel in his hair. He tried to shake Marissa's hand. She smiled like a shark and didn't take it. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Cordova, called the room to order. We opened with our evidence, the falsified boundary maps, the trench incident, the tampered public records, and testimony from Lorraine, who sat quietly in the second row, clutching a leather binder like it was a Bible. Karen's lawyer countered with vague denials and appeals to community harmony. He called our claims misunderstandings born of boundary ambiguity. Judge Cordova raised an eyebrow. "You're saying the boundary was ambiguous, but your client still spent HOA funds to dig trenches and install signage?" He tried to pivot. She didn't let him. Marissa remained calm throughout, occasionally raising a brow or flipping to a new exhibit with perfect timing. She didn't grandstand. She didn't need to. The facts were loud enough on their own. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. As the defense tried to downplay the shadow fund allegations, Marissa stood and said, "Your Honor, we'd like to present a preliminary offer for voluntary settlement." Karen visibly straightened. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Marissa continued, handing the bailiff a printed statement. The plaintiff is willing to settle for the following. 1. A public admission by the HOA of improper jurisdictional overreach. 2. A full refund to all non-member property owners who paid unlawful fees. 3. The immediate resignation of Karen Westmore and the current board. 4. Public apologies in both the County Chronicle and community press. And 5. A permanent dissolution of the HOA as an entity. Gasps. Literal gasps. One of Karen's board members started whispering furiously in her ear. She looked stunned, as if the concept of accountability was entirely foreign. Karen stood. This is outrageous. We were only trying to preserve order. This is a personal vendetta. Cordova tapped her gavel. Mrs. Westmore, you are not recognized as legal counsel. Sit down. She did, red-faced and seething. Your Honor, the HOA's attorney stammered, we reject this settlement in its entirety. Very well, Marissa said coolly. Then we proceed. That's when the hammer came down. Cordova ruled in our favor on the injunction. All HOA projects halted immediately. No spending, no construction, no enforcement. Then she scheduled a full evidentiary hearing and allowed us expedited discovery. The court granted us access to internal communications, emails, and financial records. Within 48 hours, Marissa's team uncovered damning emails between Karen and her cousin at the county clerk's office. One, dated 6 months prior, read, Once we get the south boundary shifted, that land's as good as ours. Once he builds, we hit him with violations and fine him into compliance. We submitted it as evidence the next day. The media caught wind, first local blogs, then a regional newspaper. Then a Denver TV station ran a segment called Hostile HOA, Rural Property Owner Fights Back. I was suddenly a guy with a face people recognized in the hardware store. Some gave me a thumbs up, others avoided eye contact. But I wasn't in this for fame. Coyote Glen began to fracture. Several homeowners filed motions to audit the association. One resigned from the board and emailed us privately to say, I didn't sign up for this crap. The HOA that once ruled by passive-aggressive notes and petty fines was now imploding under the weight of real law. And Karen? She tried to do what people like her always do. Double down. The night after the court ruling, I spotted her car parked outside the property again. Just sitting there in the dark, engine running, headlights off. She didn't come out. She didn't need to. She already knew she'd lost the boardroom battle, but something told me she still had one more move left. The final blow didn't come with a bang. It came with a knock. It was early morning, the sun barely cresting over the pines. I was out by the bee boxes, checking the hives, when I saw 2 black SUVs crawling slowly up the gravel road. No HOA decals this time. These had government plates. Unmistakable. By the time I reached the gate, 2 men in suits and a woman in a blazer had stepped out. The lead agent held out a badge. Office of the District Attorney, Special Investigations Division. Mr. Coulter, he said, we're here to execute a warrant on property records linked to the Coyote Glen Homeowners Association. We'd like to thank you for your cooperation so far. I opened the gate. You're gonna need a bigger folder. What followed was a cleanup, a very methodical one. The investigation had gained traction fast, thanks in part to the media attention, but mostly due to Marissa's airtight filings and the mountain of evidence we'd dug up. It wasn't just a property line dispute anymore. It was a pattern. Turns out, Karen had been running a little empire. Through falsified documents and manipulated boundary extensions, she had brought at least 4 other properties under HOA control without proper legal process. In each case, dues were collected, violations were issued, and when owners pushed back, they were either silenced or squeezed until they sold. And where did the money go? Well, not to landscaping. There were receipts for furniture, international wire transfers to a consultant in Nevada, even a suspicious payment labeled PR services, litigation containment. In short, fraud, conspiracy, abuse of authority. The DA's office indicted Karen Westmore on 4 felony charges, including real estate fraud, public record tampering, embezzlement, and attempted extortion. Her son Tyler wasn't spared. The footage of him cutting my gate and generator line had become part of the investigation. He got hit with criminal mischief, trespassing, vandalism, and destruction of utility infrastructure. All of it caught in crystal-clear night vision, courtesy of my paranoid wiring habits. The HOA board was dissolved by court order. Its remaining funds were seized and redistributed as part of a class action settlement to affected property owners. I received $275,000 in damages, enough to finish restoring the barn, install proper fencing, and pay Marissa with a bottle of top-shelf whiskey on top. And the county clerk? Karen's cousin? Fired. Under review for administrative misconduct. Her name might still show up on the registry system, but her days of quietly shifting lines behind closed doors were over. The funny thing is, even with the legal war over, I kept the signs, the ones that marked the property as an ecological restoration zone. Not because I needed the protection anymore, but because the bees had come. Dozens of them, darting through the purple blooms of native wildflowers, the air humming with a kind